Ooh, there's a spider. You're closest.
Yeah. I usually don't kill him when I see him, but
we're just gonna let it
I'm
live in the. No, we can let it live in the podcast. He can just live there. Yeah, they don't bother me unless they're on me. Now it's just gonna be a spot on the wall.
That's a reminder of all of his buddies. You tell your people. This is what they got to look forward to.
We're back. I think this is episode 13. We're actually going to finish up Joshua part 2 and then jump into Judges. So I'm not even really sure how we're going to title this at the end and if we're going to break it up at all. But Joshua, I mean, you guys basically covered the majority of it as far as the meat of the beginning. And then it runs into a whole bunch of allotment of land and then the cities of refuge and then also the allotments for the Levites and everything.
Yep.
And so really by the time you get towards the end of the book of Joshua, there's really only a couple chapters that we would look to and say, oh man, this is really good stuff, basically, and leading into the rest of it. And it's kind of like one of those things where, you know, the allotment of the land, yeah, it's nice to know. We can see it. We can see how these other nations kind of come in and where people are and all that type of stuff if you want to keep track of it. But at the same time, because it's not our land
Right.
and stuff, we typically kind of breeze through it and gloss over it. So just to kind of wrap up Joshua, I would say the main thing that I see is just when he is calling the Israelites and you see Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal and they're kind of called to each other and the Levites in the middle and they're, you know, going back and forth and they're, you know, they have that covenant relationship and they're entering into this and they're saying, yes, we will. And then there's kind of like this renewal that is seen in Shechem, and that's chapter 24. And this is probably one of the most quoted verses within Joshua, Joshua 24:15. He says, and if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your father served in the region beyond the river or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Essentially, he's got them and he's like, this is it, guys. You got to make up your mind.
Poop or get off the pot.
Yeah.
Say
Thanks for
that?
putting it those ways.
yeah, I think that's the same plaque that we had on our wall growing up was poop or get off the pot. Joshua 24:15.
RJS version.
Well,
This is why I'm not a translator.
I don't think I ever would have come up with that. Yeah. But I mean, basically the way it goes is he's like, are you sure? And they're like, yes. And he's like, well, you're going to be a witness to yourself. And they say, yes, we are witnesses. And that's kind of how Joshua ends. That generation is faithful. That's what we're seeing. And so that's how we enter into Judges. And that's where we see a huge contrast with Judges, because it's about to turn a corner when a new generation arises that has not seen and known the works of the Lord.
Their response to Joshua in this is that, how could we abandon God? Look at all that he's done. I mean, all that he's performed, how awesome he's been. And so I think that would be the other major takeaway if we had one from the end of Joshua's, if we went back to 21:45, it's like not one of the Lord's faithful promises to the family of Israel was left unfulfilled. Every one was realized. And so again, the faithfulness of God is what leads us to repentance. This is his goodness and his consistency. And so this is the reason why the same thing that he put forth, that to tell him, here's what he's done. Now, who are you going to serve? It's like, well, there's no other logical option. Not only is there not another God, obviously, but it would not be logical to not serve the Lord, to not worship him. This is part of the self-coaching we have to do, I think, in some points, where if we're tempted to stray, as we're about to see in the next book, we got to be able to self-coach ourselves back to like, wait a minute, why would I leave the God who is so great, the God who has been so awesome, who has done so much for me? Why would I sacrifice that for whatever it is in this world that's kind of drawing us away?
Yeah, that's good. It is good to see that, because that is kind of exactly how Judges goes. It starts off with the history and what God has done. Again, there is a generation that rises that does not know, and they're kind of second guessing, perhaps. It's not personal to them, at least not enough. And so they're prone to wander.
Yeah. I would equate this to the spiritual highs, so they just finished the conquest, by the Lord's hand, and everybody's really excited, like you guys have just been explaining, look at what God has done. And so they're really excited. And then, like when we turn the page into Judges, that high has kind of worn off, and we're starting to see the gradual decline of maybe we'll just let this slip in and let that slip in. And we do that in our own lives too.
Yeah. So with the youth, I contrasted the very beginning of Judges with the very end of Judges. It's quite opposite. So verse 1, after the death of Joshua, the people of Israel inquired of the Lord, and they want to know, how are we going to continue finish because there's definitely some tribes and some peoples that are still in the land, in the promised land. They still have yet to conquer all of it and take possession of all of it. So as much as they have, they still have a ways to go. And God, it mentions it several times that God did this in order to test them, as far as the nations that they had not put out. But then when you contrast that with the very end to them inquiring of the Lord and seeing how he is leading, you contrast it to, in those days there was no king in Israel, and especially that very last line, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And that's repeated over and over again in the very last portion of, I think it's like 16, 17, 19, 21. It's mentioned in all of those chapters. And those are like the worst chapters of the book, right, as far as their evil and stuff. It's huge for us to see that. And I think that is probably one of the biggest things that we can see in today's world. Man, what are we all about as a culture? What are we all about as a society? Well, it's about looking into ourselves, seeing what is right, seeing what feels right, what vibe is right, you name it. There's so many words for it, but we look to ourselves, and we are so offended by anything outside of us that tells us what to do or how we should live our life.
Man, I haven't done the math on it, but I do know that Judges covers a span of hundreds of years.
Yeah, I think it's like 350.
At least that, because I know at one point they said, if we've lived here for 300 years and you guys not said anything, and so now, this is, multiple generations of people that have come and gone. Yeah. And to see the decline, and a fast decline, not a slow one either.
Yeah, it is. Just to kind of get us into Judges, obviously it covers the little bit of land that they have not completed yet, and then chapter 2, this is what we were mentioning, with it repeats the death of Joshua and everything, but it really gives a foresight into what is going to happen. And so the vicious cycle that we all notice, like if you go through the book of Judges, you notice that there is a cycle. So the people do evil in the sight of the Lord, and so God sends oppression or some nation to conquer them or enslave them or defeat them, and then they cry out. They're like, God, why have you done this to us? Why are we, please deliver us. And so God raises up a deliverer and in the form of a judge, and they win victory. They have this time of peace. Most often is mentioned that they had rest for this many years, or they had peace for this many years. And then that leads to them then rebelling again once the leader dies, the deliverer dies. And so that's primarily where we're going with this. So
yeah, that's the whole book.
Yeah.
I mean, it's...
All right, guys, we're done.
Thank you for coming today. We got some names and details beyond that, but that's every story from here to the end. That's the path it takes.
I mean, we even talked about this in the office briefly, but this is what Moses was prophesying at the end of his life in that very long song, that this was what Israel was going to do. So now we're seeing that Moses was right.
Yes.
And he actually was a prophet.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a good prophecy to be fulfilled, but it also is true. And so that's what we can learn from this, is that, one, I think that we still see that God is faithful in the cycle. When Israel cries out, God, he responds. And two, that though he is, testing them with all these things, you kind of get the idea that, his grace is still sufficient enough. He works with some pretty rough leaders throughout this. And so God's grace is big enough to be able to cover their flaws and still redeem through them.
Yeah.
Which is really hard for us to see, I think, too, because, when you get to the end of the book, you're like, wow, these guys are pretty messed up.
I mean, just from what you were saying right there, I know what I'm preaching Sunday.
Oh, man.
That's good stuff.
You always say that.
For my phone. I got to take some notes. Yeah, I got some ideas.
Why am I planning your sermons for you?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'll just keep my ears open. And sometimes I hear things. It's not anything you said. It's something you didn't say.
Oh, okay. Well, that's cool.
I was trying to find it and I can't find it. But at one point, it does say that God says he is declaring, I will not go against my covenant that I've made. And I want to say that maybe it was back in Joshua. But it also doesn't mean that he's not going to discipline them.
Right.
And so the unconditional covenant is the love and the pursuit, and you are my people and I am your God, and that type of thing. But the conditional aspect of it is the fact that yes, God is going to bring nations to them. And I think it's one of those things too, that within Judges, in the same way that we were seeing Moses and Joshua being their leader, they are looking for a leader. And it's not such a bad thing that they're looking for a leader. It's not even a bad thing to have a human leader.
Yeah.
And we'll see that with the kings as well, and then the prophets and whatnot. But at the same time, with the time of the Judges, it's really just to point, especially we see it to be clear in this one, that these people are messed up and they are not the ones that we are to be looking for. And even like in Gideon, I mean, on the one hand, he starts by saying, listen, no, I'm not going to be your king. I'm not going to be your leader, because God is our Lord. Right. We need to serve. We need to let him be the leader. But then he turns around and he makes an ephod, and it becomes a snare and stuff. We see ourselves in it, I think, is the main point that we're getting at.
Yeah. I think, you get to see the curse kind of played out more real, in this. And, it's not that God has lifted his covenant off of them, like you had just said, but it is that he is disciplining them, and he's basically handing them over to the life that they want to live. Yeah. So when it comes to, hey, if you want to worship the Baals and the Asherahs, this is the way your life is going to go. And so all the blessing and the trust that you can have in knowing that God is going to take care of you goes away, because you're putting faith in your own efforts, and you just live. So the Baals and the Asherahs were like fertility gods, goddesses, and the Baals sometimes were, the spouse of Asherah, or they could have been the son of Asherah. Either way, I mean, these were the created things were being worshipped rather than the creator, like Romans 1:21. Yeah, so basically they're doing what I had just said. They're worshiping what they can physically grasp, rather than trusting in the words of what the Lord had said. So
I think a lot of it is telling for our relationship with God too, because like if we put ourselves in the shoes of these Israelites, and when in the end of chapter 2 and the beginning of chapter 3, and it says to test them whether they're going to take care to walk in the way of the Lord as their fathers did or not, to test them to see if they were basically going to love me, to continue that covenant love. It's telling in the sense that we look to God. It's easier to look to God for deliverance. It's easier to look to God for him to give us what we want, essentially. Right. But to have the other side of the relationship, and to be committed to God, and to love him, and to serve him, and to sacrifice for him, and basically obey, and what that means, then that's the hard part, and that's what they're not fulfilling, basically. So they're willing to call on him when they're in trouble, but as soon as things get good, they're like, yeah, there's some other things, these temporary things that seem right to us, so we're going to chase after them. They did what was right in their own eyes, and that's the Proverbs 14:12. There's a way that seems right unto a man, but in the way it leads, or in the end, it leads to death.
Yeah, I think too, as the progression through Judges, gets worse and worse, you see the Israelites treating the one true God like the pagan gods, and like you had just said, it's what reminded me of it, where they just called out to him when they needed something from him, rather than, fully devoting their lives to him.
Yeah. So we see with all the judges that are brought, we see not only a downward spiral in what Israel is doing and the evilness that they've got, but also just in the judges themselves, they get worse and worse and worse as we see. I mean, we look at Gideon and we're like, oh man, look at Gideon. He started out as a coward and he's good, but then all of a sudden now it's not like he's great. There's a lot of stuff that he does that's wicked. I mean, you really only have from Othniel to Deborah are probably the ones that we don't really see a whole lot of bad against them. Shamgar, though, it was interesting. Somebody mentioned that he may not have even been an Israelite. It doesn't mention what tribe he's from, and it doesn't even really mention. So the son of Anath. So this is chapter 3, verse 31. Shamgar, the son of Anath, that Anath could have been a reference to a foreign god, and so that he was a worshiper of another god, even that God may have used. If that's true, then that just further proves the point that God is going to use the people that he's going to use to put forth his will. And it doesn't really, it's not saying that God condones these people, but that he's just using them.
Yeah. They're often blunt instruments, right?
Yeah. Ox goads.
Right. Deborah is really the judge that has absolutely zero negative, as I read through her story. But she didn't actually judge either. She was more of a prophetess rather than a judge, although she did, preside over the dealings. But as far as a military presence, it wasn't her. Whenever we see most of these judges, they are some type of military presence.
Well, and she kind of has to prod, in a sense, everything that's happening, because, when she's calling up, who was it? Barak, yeah. Then she's got to move him. She's like, get up. She's like, go, gather your men. And they're like, come on, guys, this is the time, this is the day. And so she's reminding him, hey, weren't you the one that God has called to do this? And surely isn't he going to give them into your hands? And today's the day, so get up, let's go. So yeah, she's definitely like moving it along. What about the song of Deborah and Barak there in chapter 5?
I mean, it's pretty long.
It is. I'm like, this is one of those things that has got to be better in Hebrew, because reading it in English, you're like, doesn't really, I guess I can see it as a song, but at the same time, it's like all over the place to me.
Well, and so it's hard to tell who's singing what, but you kind of hope that Barak's singing about Deborah and not Deborah singing about Deborah.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Who knows?
But they were definitely calling out the tribes that didn't help. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Right. And that's one of the things that we start to see too. Not only is it that Israel has a problem with other nations, Israel has a problem with Israel. That there's so much disunity here, and we're seeing that especially here, but also later, that they are calling each other out. Why didn't you come to fight? Or other people are saying, why didn't you call us up? You said you were going over here, and now you're in our land, or something like that, and they're mad about it.
Yeah.
And so there's definitely tribal conflict going on.
House divided, right?
Yep. So as far as the order, we have Othniel, Ehud, we have Deborah and Barak. Shamgar just gets a verse before that.
He don't count.
Just quickly.
Yeah. And then after Deborah comes Gideon. Anything in particular with Gideon beyond what we've said?
I love his story. A man who just wants another sign, So we try to call him out for it, but the reality is that's who we are. So he gets 3 really good ones, right? First the consuming fire and the disappearing angel. So well, that wasn't enough, and then the fleece
twice.
Yeah. But then we see some pretty significant faith in that he marches out with 300 people against army that could not be numbered. And they said like a swarm of locusts.
Yeah.
And so hundreds of thousands probably.
Yeah. Well, it mentions later on when he's pursuing the 2 Z's, Zebah and Zalmunna.
ZZ Top.
Yeah, about 15,000 men were left of the army of the people of the east, for they had fallen 120,000 men who drew the sword. So
wow.
There's
it's 135,000 people.
Yeah.
With 300, that's some pretty significant faith right there.
Now, given a lot of the killing was done amongst themselves,
yeah.
because God was like, hey, you know what? I got this. But the strategy, this is one of the times where you're like, hey, this is actually good strategy. Yeah. I don't know if anybody has done this before, but the whole torches and trumpets and dividing them up, surrounding the city and stuff, that's good stuff.
Confuse them.
Yeah.
I like that Gideon's name means cutter of trees, and he cuts down an Asherah pole, and does his father know that he was naming him after a job of cutting down trees, that he would cut down the Asherah pole and the altar in their front yard?
Yeah.
Could also be roughly translated feller, as in feller of the tree or hewer, and then that can also then translate to warrior, and the great warrior that he was called. It is interesting to note, for some people, when the angel of the Lord comes to Gideon, he says, "O mighty man of valor," is what he calls him. It's just interesting that, he's in the wine press and he's hiding from all the other Midianite people and stuff. And they're like, he's afraid. He's definitely afraid at that time.
The Lord is with you. And Gideon says, say what?
Yeah. Looking around over his shoulder.
No, doesn't look like the Lord's with us. I think maybe you got us wrong.
Yeah. So what was the deal with his ephod, before we move on from him? Why was that such a bad thing, and why did it basically just goes straight into it? It says all Israel whored after it from there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family.
It's bad because the proclivity of Israel is idolatry, and any time they've made anything just about of gold, it turned into something bad.
Yeah.
And so they took from the very beginning, right? Let's make a calf.
Yeah.
And so this is very similar to that. Hey, even the calling of "Give me the earrings" is exactly what Aaron said. and fashioned the calf out of it. And so, whenever he was doing this, I don't know that he was trying to create idolatry. That this is going to be their trophy, right? He's defeated these people, and so we got something now we can go to and look at and talk about and commemorate. But it turned into something else entirely.
I mean, if you look at the culture of this area, everything is documented with monuments.
Yeah.
And God is telling them to make monuments too. Like when they cross over the Jordan, they're set up 12 stones, write the law on it. This will be a monument, to remember, like this is what the Lord has done. This is covenant with you. And so like you said, I don't think Gideon was thinking this will become something more than what it is. He probably just was like, let's make a monument to this,
Right.
because this is what the Lord has done. And then the Israelites perverted it.
Well,
God gives us good things all the time, and we pervert them.
They were a crazy superstitious people during this time frame. And we even see it even relate as far as to the Ark of the Covenant. They think, well, we're losing battle, but if we take the Ark, the good luck charm, then we'll win. And we see that later on in Kings. But and so this is just who they are. It's something for good luck, and next thing you know, it just grows from there. It's like, hey, we need to pray for something. Let's go pray over by the golden ephod. That's a pretty lucky thing, I think.
Yeah. Well, and so some of my thoughts too, and I'm not sure that this is, I'm not clear, and this is exactly what the reasoning is. But an ephod, of course, Gideon was not a priest, and so the ephod is reserved for the priest. And not only that, but God had prescribed certain places for the place where he would put his name or where he would choose. And so Ophrah is not the place that he had chosen, and so there could be some of just the general disobedience of Gideon in trying to make things go his way. And same thing with like Saul, and so the people that are like, I'm going to take things and matters into my own hands type thing, when God has instructed differently. And it could even just be the fact that, again, this is Israel divided, and they're trying to pull things and force things when they shouldn't.
And the root of it is just a lack of intimate knowledge of their God and trust in Him. It all comes back to that. If they really were walking with God, then this would not have been even a temptation.
Yeah.
Like, why would I pray to a piece of metal?
Yeah.
That's not logical, right? And yet this is
some special supernatural battle armor or something.
Right. Well, and there's the takeaway. Whenever we're not walking with God, then we become superstitious. People, I've heard all sorts of craziness people look to, and the signs that they get and interpret, and I was like, wow, if we just would walk with God, we don't have to resort to such weird superstition and looking for things and trying to make something out of something. That cloud looks like this, and that must be God telling me that. Wait a minute, let's just turn to the Word of God and see what He says. Instead, we come up with some wild stuff. And so I think this is a result of that. Rather than doing the heart work of fellowship and relationship with God, they're now, looking to good luck charms.
Yeah. And so as a result of basically what has happened, then eventually after Gideon dies, then one of his sons by his concubine, for he had many wives basically, is one of the things that we're given as insight. Abimelech, he comes up with this plan. He's like, hey, you know what? I can become the leader if I get people on my side. And so that's what happens. He ends up killing his other brothers, the ones that were actually of his legit wives, let's say, of Gideon. So he kills the 70 brothers, and then, things kind of turn against him. God basically, that whole eye for an eye thing, God executes that. It takes a long time, a little bit, but at the same time, it is. And to the point where Abimelech, at the very end, he goes to his sword bearer, armor bearer, and he's like, dude, kill me, because I don't want this millstone that fell on me. Mm-hmm. I'm about to die. I don't want it to be known as a woman that has killed me. So how about you just take me out? So anything from Abimelech that we're seeing?
I mean, just that it's getting worse.
Yeah, it is. Again, and I think one of the things that I would say at least is this is another example of everyone did what was right in their own eyes. The guy's like, hey, I got an opportunity to seize power and, try to make things go my way. So let's do it.
Well, and we see the digression. Now they're murdering each other in order to get this position. It's like, well, we're just a little while ago, Gideon's was like, no, I'm not going to rule over you. Mm-hmm. This is not how things operate. And now one generation later, it's like, no, not only will I rule over you, I'll kill everybody in the path to get there.
Yeah. We have a few more judges mentioned, but not a whole lot given. Tola, and then Jair, and we have some others that will come later. But first we have Jephthah. This one is probably one of the sadder stories.
Yes. This one and Samson, they rank up there as the saddest
Yeah.
for me. It's depending upon how you interpret Jephthah, obviously a little more sad.
Yeah. So as far as Jephthah, this perhaps, at least as far as we try to, obviously we try to reason things, we try to logic things, we try to figure out why is it that he is actually, why did he make that vow? So essentially, again, if you're unfamiliar, he says, God, if you give these people into my hands, then I'm going to sacrifice whatever comes out of my house. And the Septuagint, I think, or one of them says, whoever comes out of my house. So he may very well have known that he was going to sacrifice a person, a human sacrifice. And the only thing that we can make sense of that is that he really, again, did not know the difference between the God of Israel and all these other gods, because all these other gods, that's what made sense to them. They would worship them and they would kind of control them or get them on their side by offering the proper sacrifice or whatever they thought they demanded. And so if he thought that the God of Israel, the God of the Bible, demanded human sacrifice, then he was willing to do that in order to get the victory and stuff. One of the weird things about it, though, is that in 29, right before he makes the vow, so 11:29, it says, then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah. And yet that's before he makes the vow.
That's right.
And it's like, wait a minute. I got questions.
and different versions will translate this a little bit differently. My particular version kind of gives it a personal, whereas whoever comes out, then he will be sacrificed, whereas other versions say whatever and it.
Yeah.
And so I went back to the original Hebrew, and it's a little bit ambiguous. It could go either way.
Okay.
So in my heart, I would like to believe that Jephthah was not trying to sacrifice a person. And obviously when you see his response to his daughter coming out, that was not his intentions.
Correct.
So, I'm just hoping that, he probably had a bunch of cats.
Yeah.
And he thought, hey, whatever comes out first, I don't care if it was the multicolored one or the black one or the white one, God, I'm gonna kill it. It's like, okay, and so I really do believe that his initial intention was not, hey, let's sacrifice a human. But man, you track this thing out, and context seems to point to the fact that he did, in fact, sacrifice his daughter. And I don't want that to be the reality. So if somebody could give me a good way to avoid what seems to be obvious in the context, then I would accept it readily. A lot of people that say, well, no, he probably dedicated her to the temple for the rest of her life, and so that's why they mourned her virginity. But that, again, contextually, her tragic death gave rise to the custom in Israel.
Yeah.
At least that's how this version has it.
Yeah.
Right. And I would think that if there was a commemoration every year.
She did.
Yeah. And it wasn't a good death. It wasn't like she died at old age because she was a virgin.
Yeah, you don't commemorate somebody died at 90.
Yeah. Right.
Not every year, right?
Not for 4 days.
No, this is a big, tragic deal.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm telling you, you're talking about the epitome of the low that Israel has sunk to. Here it is. This is not God that told him to do this, and God's not telling anybody to do this ever. You look back through it. Never has a person been, with the exception of Isaac, and even then it was just a test. God was not actually going to allow that to happen. And yet we've sunk so low now that they just don't know God well enough to realize how bad off this is.
Yeah, and that's kind of where my mind goes too, is I have to think that if he had sought the Lord, if there was a prophet in the area, or even if he had, the Spirit of the Lord in him, then, or still on him, then he would have been able to understand, no, this is not something that God is going to require of me. But
well, and even this, say you make the vow, and in their culture, in their context, their understanding of it, if I don't honor the vow, then God kills me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that not the better solution?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, how do you not just say, no, I'm going to fall on the sword on this one? God, I'm yours. Do what you got to do.
Yeah, I was stupid.
Yeah, that was a dumb
so
thing
I'm
to
gonna
say.
pay for
And
it
so
myself.
if you need to take me out, then take me out. But I'm not killing my daughter.
Yeah.
I cannot wrap my head around this passage, and I don't like it.
Yeah.
and I don't know what to tell anybody watching or anybody that's reading it. It's like, at some point, God's going to have to resolve this for us in heaven, because it's never going to be a resolution here other than to say this was stupid. It should have never happened. And that fits well with the book. That's kind of the whole genre here. This is
did what was
stupid,
right
and
in his
it
own
should
eyes
never-
in the time. What made sense to him at the time.
Yeah, how does that make sense, right? We can't get our head around it, but that's not the end.
Yeah, for me, I definitely see, one, the lapse in judgment, and then two, he just has forgotten the character of God.
Yes.
And three, that he cares more about his own life than he cares about his daughter's life. And I guess now that he's done this, he will mourn her for the rest of his life. I can't imagine it.
No,
But yeah,
no.
I think the bigger thing is that he had forgotten the character of God.
That's wild to me.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nobody that I wouldn't kill before I killed my children.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole rest of the world. I take them out first.
Yeah.
It's just, how does that not still but they thought things differently for sure. They viewed life differently. And if we're completely honest, they viewed female life differently.
Yeah.
And so it's, again,
We'll see that later.
It's not godly and it's not of God's making. And so this is where you go whenever you take God out of the equation.
Yeah. So chapter 12, we get more of the inner tribal conflict and stuff, and then we have just some other very brief mentions of a couple people that were also mentioned as judges. And then chapter 13, we come into the birth of Samson, and so this is 13 through 16 basically is the story of Samson before we get into some of the worst stories within all of Judges. And so what are we seeing in the life of Samson that should be shared, and what do we learn from it, other than the fact that obviously, speaking of women, guys, don't let the women be the ones that what's going to take you down, because they definitely can and will, and basically it's the lust and the sexual immorality and stuff primarily, because it just says he saw these women and he wanted them. So
no, she's the one. That's what I told Dad. She's the one, man. She's the one.
Yeah.
I was like, wait a minute. You're not even qualified to know what the one
Next
is.
scene, he goes to a prostitute.
Yeah,
Next scene, he's like, no, there's another girl that I really like.
Yeah. I was like, we're seeing a pattern here, Samson.
Yeah.
Samson the blood was not going to his head.
As far as finding something that stands out, we know Samson's story so well that there's nothing really we can say that people haven't read or remember. But verse 18 of chapter 13 is unique. I mean, they want to know the name of the one that's speaking of the angel, right? And it's like, you should not ask my name because you cannot comprehend it. I thought, oh, okay. So what was that name?
It
then?
must be that Shibboleth or whatever they had to. That they made him say. You pronounce it wrong, you're dead.
It's not that you can't pronounce it; you can't comprehend it.
I know, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
It would be interesting. There's nowhere to go with that. I just, whenever I read it, I thought, that's interesting.
Well, and you go down a little bit further, and this is not to say that it's completely, 100% accurate that he was correct in saying it, but Manoah said to his wife, "We shall surely die, for we have seen God." Mm-hmm. So again, this is one of those things. It's not capitalized, but was it a pre-incarnate Christ?
Right.
It could have been.
That was my thinking too.
And some of it is because it's more of a personal, this is what I'm going to do and stuff like that.
And you've got to imagine if this was a Christophany and he tried to explain to Manoah the Trinity.
Right, yeah.
Like, I'm God the Son. Like, wait just a minute here.
Yeah.
What? I mean, we're still working on that with all the New Testament. And for him to have, thrown that nugget out there, it would have short-circuited Manoah probably.
Yeah. Essentially, we see the character of Samson. It's not great, even though he was supposed to be a Nazirite from birth, as opposed to just a certain amount of time as a Nazirite, but he really didn't live up to it. The hair was probably one of the only things that he probably did, because we see that he kills a lion, and that seems, man, okay, this dude is strong, he's a mighty warrior, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But yet he goes back and he's like, I want some of that honey. And so, I mean, he's very
He would have to start
sensual
over
in
right
the
there.
sense, the sensuality, not just in the sexual form, but also just in, like, he's going to eat what he wants, that type of thing. He's like, I'm okay, I'm above this. So I can just take this honey, and then he uses it to create a riddle. Mm-hmm. And so then we see his anger.
So I find comedy and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And one of my favorites of this particular story is in chapter 14, where the lion comes out and the Lord's Spirit empowered him, and he tore the lion in two with his bare hands as easily as one would tear a young goat.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that reference might be dated. When's the last time you tore a young goat?
Yeah.
How easy is it to rip a goat
I don't
apart?
know. How often? I mean, maybe they're ripping goats like left and right around there. It was like, it's easy as ripping a goat. I got nothing. I was like, I read that. I was like, well, I still don't know how easy it was for him.
They had competitions like, how many goats can you rip at once?
That's the new Olympics.
Yeah.
Goat ripping.
You would think about that.
I did. I was like, this is hilarious. It's as easy as you rip a young goat. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
Anybody got a young goat? I want to test a theory here.
I mean, the only thing that I really was thinking about was my mind went to he's supposed to be a Nazarite, but yeah, he went up to a dead carcass without any thought.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm gonna touch it.
Yep. Because he wanted honey.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. You know, we see some of the downfall of his character, and then it just gets worse from there. Obviously, does well in defeating the Philistines in different ways. Very supernatural strength. I mean, that's pretty clear that we can see.
Yeah.
Because there's no way you're taking on that many people and coming across, and no way you're taking these huge gates or doors on your back and hiking, running for a long distance and stuff. So towards the end of it, though, basically Delilah is the named woman as far as the one who is his downfall. But it did take some time, and you got to think there's no way that he really did love her. Like, you know, yeah, he may have had some love, like in the sense of like definitely attraction, and you know, he wanted to keep her around. But at the same time, you know, when she's saying, hey, if you really loved me, if you really cared about me, then you wouldn't let me be so harassed and made fun of and stuff. You just tell me the truth. Tell me what is the secret of your strength. And you can also only imagine that he knew that she was not trustworthy. That's kind of the other thing that I think about. He's got to know that she's not a great woman. And so it takes her up until the fourth time before he actually tells her the truth. And it leads to his downfall.
Yeah, and I realize, again, you go back to the very beginning, God is seeking an occasion, right? And so all of this, while is error after error after error on Samson's part, it's all playing perfectly into what God's doing. Again, blunt instrument, this Samson fits it perfectly.
Yeah.
And yet when I read the story, I'm like, man, I hate this story because I don't want it to turn out the way it's going to turn out. I don't want it to go the way it's going to go. And yet God is sovereign in all of this, and he is using this man to fix a problem that's bigger than one life. Part of that process is he's allowing him to make some foolish decisions, but within that, you know, he's doing the whole thing. It just comes back to the mind-boggling sovereignty of God. You know, you try to figure stuff out. God is not the author of sin ever, and yet we find him sinning, but yet God uses it to work according to his will. And so it's like, man, those pieces, they don't fit so tight in my mind.
Well, I think in his call out to the Lord, you see that he knew that this was the end.
Yes.
Like if he was pulling it down or pushing it down, I guess is what he really did. But he was done.
And it's possible that God would have let him survive that. Maybe, I don't know what the grand scheme would have been beyond that, but he had so ruined his life at this point, there was very little left to live for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's why this is, other than Jephthah, the saddest of all of them.
Yeah.
And man, you just destroyed one of the best gifts you had. It's like, this is something God had given you that the world would long for. Every young boy I know would want to be a Samson if he could, right? And you had that, and you just didn't cherish it. And so, I mean, there's a lot of application there.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when it comes to the character and even you could say the slow decline, because, you know, when it comes to the hair, I mean, he lied about it 3 times before he told her the truth. And so you have to ask yourself, did he honestly think that something was going to happen? Or did he think that he was going to be able to keep his strength? And to a certain extent, you know, if he still had strength when it came to the lion and he touched the dead carcass and stuff and he ate the honey, then maybe he thought he was above it. Maybe he thought God was going to use him anyway. And so maybe he thought that he could tell her to cut his hair and stuff and it would still be okay. But even if he didn't, even if he did believe that, okay, well, you know, he was just stupid enough to actually tell her the truth, you know, either way, yeah, it led to the tragic end as far as them gouging out his eyes and taking him as prisoner. And then, you know, finally that one last call of, God, please strengthen me one last time.
Yeah.
And the Spirit coming down.
It's hard to say, because if it came down to, you know, it's because I'm a Nazarite that God has given me the strength, then he violated basically everything except for the hair.
Yeah.
Until, you know, the end. So
yeah,
maybe it was that it came down to that last thing. God was like, okay, now you're no longer a Nazarite.
The final thread, huh?
Right, yeah, literally.
Yep.
Yeah. Final strand.
Well, and so it shows I guess the faithful and graciousness of God, even in that, as he was violating, God still was faithful. But there is a point, right, for all of us. And he thought, you know, maybe he thought because he'd gotten away with it, he could get away with it. Or maybe he thought, you know, it was all the hair all along. We don't really know. But either way, he didn't cherish it.
One of the things that's interesting too is that, of all the judges, Samson seems like the least fitting of what a judge was. Like when we look at the other ones too, it's like, he seems so independent, and he's the one that God is using to conquer, these people and stuff, but he's not leading an army. It doesn't seem like, to an extent, but at the very end, especially, it's just like he's a one-man show and he's just doing what he's doing. And again, it's the epitome of everyone does what is right in his own eyes. And this was Samson. He was doing it.
Yeah. I feel like a scene from, a Marvel movie. It's like, it's time to get angry.
Yeah. I'm the Hulk.
Samson was the inspiration for the Hulk.
Yeah, maybe. It's like, it's the time to get angry.
One of these
like,
words translates to green.
Secret.
Yeah.
He had green skin.
Secret is he's always angry.
Yeah. There you go.
Samson means sun man.
Yeah.
So take and do that. Do whatever you want with that.
Nothing.
Was he bright? I don't know.
I mean, he doesn't seem so bright.
His parents didn't know that.
Well, I do appreciate the spiral of things. There's a little bit here, and he gets angry and he kills a little bit, and then there's a little more, and he gets even madder and kills some more. It's like with each layer, this thing definitely crescendos up a little bit. It's like, okay, all right. Oh, you go give her to somebody else. I'm going to burn your fields down. Oh, so you're going to burn her. I'm going to kill a bunch of you. Yeah. So, definitely God is stacking this as far as bringing it to a head.
Yeah, of all the imagery that you see in the Bible, I would like to know exactly what is meant by when he took the foxes, tied their tails together, tied a torch to them, and sent them through the fields in the vineyards.
Yeah.
I'm like...
I got questions, too.
Yeah, I want to look... what did that look like? Yeah. I want some drone imagery. How fast did it spread? Whether did the foxes get away? But anyway.
How do you not get chewed on while you're tying your tails together?
Yeah.
I got questions.
Yeah, there's a lot. The last portion of Judges really is the worst of the worst. So we've got a couple of main stories. Micah and everything that happens with what he does, and then the Levite and everything that he does with his concubine.
It's full departure from the structure of God.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They had exchanged the word of God and the way of God for basically superstition and just whatever they made up.
Yeah.
So it's just everybody doing right. Everybody's making it up. It's like, hey, you know what? We should have a priest here.
Yeah.
Why? Yeah, it's because I think it'll help. Surely God will bless me then. Superstition.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not how that works. How do you know that's not how it works? Right?
He found a Levite and was like, oh man, this is actually like one of the real ones.
Right.
Yeah.
That's it. I'd hired my son to do it, but we knew we were just kidding.
Well, I kind of feel like, to a certain extent, my mind actually goes to some of the Star Wars type stuff, and I'm not even really sure why, but it's like, oh, this must be like the Jedi type thing. You're a Levite. You're one of the ones that's close to this magical power up here, and so if I have you, then you're my good luck charm, or you're the one that's going to make things happen and stuff. In some ways, it's a way to manipulate in my mind. Like he was thinking, this is a way I can manipulate circumstances. I can, again, not just do what is right in my own eyes, but control my circumstances.
Well, and it's self-fulfilling prophecy too, right? Now that I have this Levite, I'm going to be blessed. So everything that happens that's good, from there on, you're going to interpret it, oh, that's because I have the Levite.
Yeah.
And so it's very self-fulfilling. And so you're going to continue to lead yourself in that direction if you're relying on your own intuition and understanding to be your guide.
Yeah.
And it's not just him. Obviously, the next group that comes along feels the same way about it. I was like, he got a Levite. We should get that.
Yeah. So let's take them.
Yeah. That was the Danites, right? The
Danites. And so again, the fact that they're Danites that are committing these crimes, is no longer like outside nations that are coming in. In this particular case, it is among the tribe of Israel that is going against the tribe of Israel and the people of Israel. And then the Levite, just how horrible actions that the Levite has. This is clearly not what a Levite should be. I mean, number one, shouldn't even have had a concubine, let alone all the rest. But
I'm pretty sure it says in there somewhere that they just continued to worship these idols until the deportation. It's like that's I read that somewhere.
Was it verse 31 of 18? They worship Micah's carved image the whole time God's authorized shrine was in Shiloh.
That's close enough.
The place that God had chosen.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
And it's almost poetic too that this guy had stolen money from his mother, right, Micah?
Yeah.
And it was, you think, 1,100 pieces of silver. How much is that? Well, he's paying the priest 10 pieces a year, so 1,100 is a lot.
Yeah.
We're talking, even if you're wealthy, that's 5 years of income. So you can do the math on that, how it would relate now. And so here, this thief, he does give it back because he wanted to avoid the curse because he's scared of superstitious stuff, right? But so now this thief gets his stuff stolen. I was like, well, you live by it, you die by it.
Yeah. And so all this leads to, within especially the Levite and what happens with his concubine and the whole giving of these girls, basically. And man, it's just horrible. And even just the way that it's worded, where it's like, at his threshold. I almost get this image that they were trying to get back in.
Yeah.
Or that they were trying to, come back. And that's where they died. And meanwhile, he's just sleeping.
Yeah.
This is just absolutely horrendous. And so when it comes to his actions, again, it seems like he's not even distraught about exactly what happened. He's distraught that it's happened against him, if you will. And so he's like, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to get back. And so his revenge is not, it seems like it's not just in what has happened, but that it has happened to him, if that makes sense. And so the offense is not he's not avenging their death. He's taking revenge, in my mind. And so that's what leads to, eventually this civil war.
Yeah, this might be the worst chapter in the Bible. It should come with a rating.
Nobody's making movies about this.
No.
And please don't.
Yes. So they are wicked. They have basically raped this woman to death. And he chops her up into 12 pieces, sends her to the 12 tribes of Israel to state his position on what has happened, that the tribe of Benjamin has done this atrocity. They all gather together to go to war against Benjamin. They lose twice. First time, I think they lost 22,000 people. So 600,000 men were defeated by like 20,000, give or take.
Yeah.
And so Benjamin were definite warriors. It was 27,000 of them. And Israel showed up with 400,000. That's what it was. So 27,000 defeated 400,000 twice. They in 2 days in a row they fought. And day 3, God says, I'm going to hand them over to you, and he does. And they had a little bit better plan day 3, and some ambush, burned the city. And we've seen the same plan work out multiple times throughout the Old Testament. Hide some people here and burn the city while we're out here fighting, and then they're going to lose faith and hope, and then we'll kill them. And they did. They killed them all the way down to 600. Only 600 from the entire tribe of Benjamin survived after this war. And then they realized, oh man, we have extinguished an entire tribe. And they sat and they wept bitterly because they'd all made a vow. They cannot marry any of our daughters. They took that vow to each other before God that they're not going to marry. We're not going to give any of our daughters to them to marry because they were angry.
Yeah. They were like, let's let them die out.
Yeah, let's kill them. And then they realized, that might have been a little rash.
Yeah.
There's going to be no one left from the entire.
Well, and again, some of that may have been coming from their superstition or reasonable thought of, well, God has promised this. And so if they don't have an inheritance, then, God's obviously going to do something to continue them on, essentially. Now, God works it out through what goes on as far as them gaining wives for the remaining Benjamites.
So which is also unique. They go and basically slaughter another town.
Yeah.
And take all the young girls, bring them. I was like, well, is that the solution? I don't know if that's. It just felt extra.
Well, I think that this is why this
it's
is
total
at the
depravity.
End. Yeah, I mean, just is showing how bad and wretched, like the Israelites were, apart from God.
Yeah.
And the whole thing ends with, in those days, Israel had no king.
Yeah.
And I think that it means that they had no physical king, but they also didn't treat the Lord as king.
That's right.
And
correct.
So that's the more important detail in this, is that the whole time they have placed their faith in themselves, the Baals and the Asherahs, and have dedicated their lives to pagan worship and sexual immorality.
Yeah.
And
having no king, really, they recognize no authority.
right.
That's really what it is, a rejection of authority.
Yeah.
And wholesale for the whole nation. And so,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Well, and even I think in the times that we see them turning back, they're not recognizing the covenant that the Lord had made with them in full.
Yeah, it's
And-
not written down. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, at the end of Deuteronomy, Moses spells out, here's the covenant. At the end of Joshua's like, here's the covenant. At the end of Judges, it's like, wow, these people have totally abandoned their God.
Yeah.
Well, and if we think back, they were supposed to, at least every 7 years, if nothing else, at least every 7 years, they were supposed to have read the law and heard the law, therefore, and be reintroduced to the law. So several times in a generation, they should at least know. And not only that, but they were commanded to hide it in their heart. They were commanded to wear it, on their foreheads and on their forearms. And they were going out, coming in. So clearly the rebellion and the disobedience started way before. And again, not knowing the word of God, not knowing God. And when you don't know God and you don't know his word, then you're certainly going to go your own way. And that's certainly a huge takeaway for us as far as here and now. And we see the total depravity of man, like we've said, and we've mentioned this before, and just when the world around us is kind of in chaos, we're like, man, how quickly would things go downhill? Yeah. It would be very fast, very fast. It's frightening. And I think that's why, when we talk about people like prepping and stuff like that, people that are preppers and stuff, they're not wrong. Like, it doesn't take a whole lot. No. And we'd be in a really rough spot. Yeah. Most recently, price of eggs went up because some chickens died. Yeah. I mean, to oversimplify it. Yeah, sure. But seriously.
Well, I mean, there's no way that this time, however many years it was, 300 and some years this covers. Yeah. We turn the page to Ruth, we find out there was a famine in the land. And so at some point during the time of the judges, so it wasn't good.
Yeah. And so, we see it repeated in the New Testament, man must not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of God, right? And that's the structure of life, the way we live. And if we could write it for judges and for our present time, is man must not live by emotion, because this is what we're finding. Here, why are they so angry at Benjamin for doing this one little thing? In the scope of all that's happened, this is one life. And yet, for the solution, they go murder a whole town. Yeah, I'm like, this is just such wild, rampant emotion that's controlling everything. It's just whatever they can dream up and whatever they feel, rather than living by the word of God. And so, it comes all the way back full circle to, hey, that's why Jesus said man should not live by bread alone, or whatever he can create. Basically, is what we're doing now, and instead by what God has given us. Yeah, and so that's. They have not returned to the Word of God yet, as we conclude the book of Judges.
Yep. So it definitely ends on a dark picture. We get a little bit of hope in Ruth, those 4 chapters before we move into Kings. So, Samuel, rather.